The morning Willa Peterson collapsed in the dusty main street of Beaver, Utah, clutching her swollen belly and crying out for help she did not expect to receive. Ethan Burke was riding back from checking his cattle in the northern pasture. He saw the crowd gathering but staying back, saw the woman's threadbare dress and worn boots, saw the way people whispered and turned away. In 1878, a woman alone and with child was often considered a scandal best ignored. Ethan dismounted before he could think better of it, his boots hitting the sun-baked earth with a thud that scattered the few curious onlookers still pretending to care. He was a tall man, broad-shouldered from years of ranch work, with sun-weathered skin and dark hair that needed cutting. At 27, he had built his ranch from nothing, and he had learned that most people's opinions were not worth the breath it took to argue with them. "Miss, can you stand?" He knelt beside her, keeping his voice low and calm the way he would with a frightened horse. Willa looked up at him through eyes hazed with pain and exhaustion. She was perhaps 22 or 23, with honey-colored hair that had escaped its pins and pale skin burned pink from too much sun. "Please, I just need water. I will move along. I am sorry for the disturbance." "When did you last eat?" He could see the answer in the hollow of her cheeks, the way her dress hung loose everywhere except where the child grew. "I have been managing fine," she said, but her voice cracked on the lie. Ethan slipped his arm under her shoulders and helped her sit up properly. The crowd had dispersed entirely now, people retreating into their shops and homes, eager to distance themselves from whatever tragedy was unfolding. "My wagon is just there. I am taking you to my ranch. You need food and rest." "No." Willa tried to pull away, though she had no strength for it. "I will only burden you. I cannot ask that of anyone." "You did not ask. I am offering." Ethan kept his tone gentle but firm, and sharing burdens makes them lighter for us both. She stared at him for a long moment, searching his face for ulterior motives or cruelty. He met her gaze steadily, and whatever she saw there must have satisfied her, because she gave a small, trembling nod. Getting her into the wagon took more effort than he had anticipated. She was weak enough that her legs barely supported her, and he ended up lifting her as carefully as he could manage. She weighed far too little for a woman carrying a child. Once she was settled on the bench beside him, he drove straight to the general store and left her with a canteen of water while he went inside. The storekeeper, Martha Henderson, raised her eyebrows when she saw him loading supplies. "That the woman who was causing a scene in the street?" "That is the woman who needed help and did not get it," Ethan corrected, his jaw set. He added dried apples and a tin of crackers to his purchases, things Willa could eat immediately. Martha had the grace to look ashamed. "We did not know what to do." She would not say where she came from or where she was going. Maybe because she knew nobody would help either way. Ethan paid for his goods and carried them out without further conversation. Willa had tears streaming down her face when he returned, though she was trying to hide them. She had drunk half the canteen and was clutching it like a lifeline. "I should not have accepted. You will regret this kindness. Let me worry about my own regrets." He handed her the crackers and waited while she ate 3 of them in quick succession, her hands shaking. Only when she had eaten half the tin did he start the wagon toward his ranch. The Burke Ranch sat in a valley about 5 miles outside Beaver, nestled against red rock hills that glowed like fire in the evening sun. It was not the biggest spread in the territory, but Ethan had worked hard to make it profitable. He ran cattle and horses and kept a kitchen garden that his housekeeper Rosa managed with fierce pride. Rosa came out onto the porch when she heard the wagon, wiping her hands on her apron. She was a Mexican woman in her 50s who had worked for Ethan since he first bought the land, and she had opinions about everything. Those opinions were currently written all over her face as she took in Willa's condition. "She needs rest and food," Ethan said in Spanish, knowing Willa likely would not understand. "She is in a bad way." Rosa answered in English, probably for Willa's benefit. "The guest room is ready. Bring her inside." This time, Ethan simply carried Willa, too concerned with getting her settled to worry about propriety. Rosa led the way to a small but comfortable room on the ground floor, with windows that looked out over the garden. The bed had been freshly made with a colorful quilt, and there was a basin of water on the dresser. "I will bring soup," Rosa announced, already heading for the door. "And you will eat all of it," she added, pointing at Willa with a stern finger. Left alone with Ethan, Willa seemed to shrink into herself. "I do not understand why you are doing this. You do not know me. You do not know what I have done or where I come from." Ethan pulled the rocking chair from the corner and sat down, giving her space. "You are right. I do not know those things. You want to tell me." She was quiet for so long he thought she might refuse. Then, in a voice barely above a whisper, she said, "My husband died 4 months ago. Cholera. We were traveling to California to start fresh, but he got sick in Kansas. By the time it was over, I had nothing left. I sold everything to bury him properly and pay our debts. I have been walking and working where I could ever since. I am sorry." The words felt inadequate, but they were genuine. Everyone is sorry, but sorry does not feed you or give you shelter. She looked down at her hands, twisted in her lap. "I thought I could make it to California before the baby came, but I have been so tired. When I woke up this morning in that alley, I could barely move. I just wanted water. I did not mean to make a spectacle." "You did not make a spectacle. You needed help, and this town should be ashamed that I was the only one who offered it." Ethan leaned forward, his elbows on his knees. "Here is what I think should happen. You stay here until you are well enough to decide what you want to do next. You rest, you eat, you take care of yourself and that baby. When you are strong again, if you want to go to California, I will help you get there. If you want to stay, we will figure that out too. No obligations, no expectations, just safety and time to heal." "Why?" The word came out broken. "Why would you do this for a stranger?" Ethan thought about his own mother, who had died when he was 15, worn down by poverty, and a husband who drank more than he worked. He thought about all the times she had needed help and been too proud to ask, or had asked and been refused. Because someone should have helped her, and nobody did. "I will not make that mistake with you." Willa started crying in earnest then, deep sobs that shook her whole body. Ethan stayed in the chair, letting her weep, understanding that these were tears that had been building for months. When Rosa returned with soup and bread, she shooed him out and took over the care with brisk efficiency. Over the following weeks, Willa slowly regained her strength. She slept for nearly 2 days straight at first, waking only to eat the meals Rosa brought and then falling back into exhausted sleep. When she finally emerged, she was still too thin and her eyes still carried shadows, but there was more life in her face. She insisted on helping around the house despite Rosa's protests. "I cannot just lie about eating your food and using your space," Willa argued. "Let me do something to earn my keep." Rosa looked to Ethan, who shrugged. "Light work only, nothing that will tire you." So Willa began helping with mending and food preparation, tasks she could do sitting down. She had clever fingers and an eye for detail, and she repaired Ethan's torn shirts better than they had been when new. In the evenings, she would sit on the porch in the rocking chair, her hands on her belly, watching the sun set over the red hills. Ethan found himself drawn to those evening conversations. He would finish his work and join her on the porch, and they would talk about small things at first. The weather, the cattle, the way the light changed as summer shifted toward fall, Gradually, the conversations deepened. "I was 17 when I married Thomas," Willa said one evening, her voice soft with memory. "He was kind and ambitious, and I thought we would have such a grand adventure together. We were going to build an empire in California, or at least that is what he always said. He worked so hard, maybe too hard. He never stopped long enough to rest properly. You loved him. It was not a question." "I did. Not the wild, passionate love from novels, but something steady and warm. He was my friend." She paused, her expression distant. "I think he would have wanted me to be safe. He would have liked you for helping me. What will you call the baby?" Ethan asked, changing the subject when he saw tears gathering in her eyes. "I do not know yet. It feels wrong to choose without knowing if it is a boy or girl. My mother said you should not name a child until you look in their eyes and see who they are meant to be." She smiled faintly. "I hope they have Thomas's determination, but maybe a bit more sense about when to rest." As autumn painted the valley in gold and crimson, Willa bloomed. She had gained weight and color, and though her belly was large and cumbersome, she moved with more ease than when she had first arrived. She also laughed more, a sound that Ethan found himself working to provoke. She had a quick wit when she felt safe enough to use it, and she could match him in verbal sparring. "You know that cow of yours is plotting something," she said one afternoon, watching from the fence as Ethan worked with a particularly stubborn heifer. "She has that look in her eye." "She is just spirited," Ethan replied, dodging as the heifer kicked out. "Spirited is what you call children who talk back. That cow wants to murder you." The heifer chose that moment to charge, and Ethan had to vault the fence to avoid being run down. Willa was laughing so hard she had to sit down, and he could not help but join in, even as he brushed dust from his clothes. "I stand corrected," he said, grinning. "She definitely wants to murder me." It was in these moments that Ethan realized his feelings had shifted from simple compassion to something deeper and more complicated. He looked forward to seeing Willa each morning. He found excuses to be near her during the day. At night, lying in his own bed, he thought about her smile, her laugh, the way she hummed while she sewed. But she was a widow, pregnant with another man's child and still healing from loss. He had no right to these feelings, so he tried to keep them locked away. Willa, for her part, was fighting her own battle. She had noticed the way Ethan looked at her when he thought she was not paying attention. She saw the gentleness in his hands when he helped her up from a chair or steadied her on uneven ground. She felt the warmth of his presence like sunlight, and it terrified her. She had no business falling for another man, not when she still wore black for Thomas, not when she was carrying his child. It felt like a betrayal of everything she and Thomas had built together. Yet she could not deny the way her heart lifted when Ethan smiled, or how safe she felt in his presence. One evening in late October, she found the courage to address it. They were on the porch as usual, watching the first stars appear in the deepening blue of the sky. "Ethan, I need to say something, and I need you to let me finish before you respond." He turned to her, his expression serious. "All right. I am grateful beyond words for everything you have done for me. You saved my life and the life of my child. You have given me a home when I had none, and kindness when the world had shown me mostly cruelty." She took a breath, steadying herself. "But I see the way you look at me sometimes, and I need to tell you that I cannot. I am not ready for. I may never be ready for what I think you are hoping for." The words hung in the air between them. Ethan was quiet for a long moment, his jaw working as he considered his response. When he finally spoke, his voice was low and careful. "I will not lie to you, Willa. I have come to care for you more than I probably should have. But I meant what I said that first day. No obligations, no expectations. If all you ever want from me is friendship and a safe place to raise your child, that is enough. You do not owe me anything more." "That is not fair to you," she whispered. "Let me decide what is fair to me." He reached over and took her hand, his calloused fingers gentle around hers. "You have been through hell, and you are still standing. That takes more strength than most people will ever have. Whatever you need, whether it is space or time or just someone to sit with you on the porch, I am here." "Nothing has to change." Willa squeezed his hand, unable to speak past the lump in her throat. They sat like that until the sky went fully dark, hands linked, neither quite ready to let go. The baby came on a cold November night, 3 weeks earlier than expected. Willa had been feeling odd all day, restless and uncomfortable, but had dismissed it as the usual late pregnancy discomfort. When her water broke during supper, she stared at the puddle on the floor in shock. "Rosa," she said faintly, and then the first contraction hit. Rosa moved into action with impressive speed, barking orders at Ethan. "Get the doctor from town. Bring him quickly. And bring Alice Morrison. She has delivered half the babies in this valley. Go now." Ethan ran for his horse, riding harder than he had ever ridden in his life. He found Dr. Hammond finishing his evening meal and Alice Morrison putting her grandchildren to bed. He had them both in a wagon and heading back to the ranch within 20 minutes. By the time they arrived, Willa's contractions were coming fast and hard. Ethan could hear her cries from outside the house, and each one felt like a knife to his chest. He wanted to be with her, but Rosa firmly barred the door to the bedroom. "This is women's work," she said. "You will only be in the way. Go pace somewhere else." So Ethan paced the porch, then the yard, then the barn. He checked on the horses 3 times even though they were fine. He reorganized the tack room. He did anything to keep his hands busy and his mind from dwelling on all the things that could go wrong. It was past midnight when he heard the sound he had been waiting for, a thin, angry wail that cut through the night. He was running for the house before he realized he was moving. Dr. Hammond met him at the door, his sleeves still rolled up. "You have a healthy baby girl, Mr. Burke. The mother did well, all things considered. She is tired but strong. Can I see her? Give Alice a few more minutes to finish cleaning up, then yes." Those few minutes felt like hours. When Alice finally opened the door and nodded him in, Ethan stepped into the room like a man approaching an altar. Willa was propped up on pillows, her hair damp with sweat and her face pale with exhaustion. But she was smiling, a radiant, wondering smile that transformed her entire face. In her arms, wrapped in one of Rosa's soft blankets, was the smallest human being Ethan had ever seen. "Come meet her," Willa said softly. Ethan approached slowly, almost afraid to breathe. The baby had a shock of dark hair and a tiny, scrunched face that was red from crying. As he watched, she yawned, revealing pink gums, and one miniature hand escaped the blanket to wave in the air. "She is perfect," he said, his voice rough with emotion. "I am going to call her Charlotte. Charlotte Ann, after my mother and Thomas's mother." Willa looked up at him, her eyes shining. "Would you like to hold her?" Ethan had held calves and foals and puppies, but a human baby was entirely different. He took Charlotte with exaggerated care, terrified he might break her. She weighed almost nothing, just a warm, breathing bundle of possibility. When she opened her eyes and seemed to look directly at him, something in his chest cracked open. "Hello, Charlotte," he whispered. "Welcome to the world." Over the following months, Ethan watched Willa transform into a mother. She was devoted to Charlotte with a fierce intensity, nursing her and rocking her and singing soft lullabies in the deep of night. Ethan often woke to hear Willa's voice drifting through the house, sweet and low, and he would lie in his bed listening, feeling like an intruder on something sacred. But Willa included him in Charlotte's life in ways he had not expected. She asked him to hold the baby while she ate. She showed him how to support Charlotte's head properly. When Charlotte smiled for the first time, a gummy, toothless grin, Willa called for Ethan to come see. "Look, she smiled at me." Willa was laughing with pure joy. "Do it again, sweet girl. Show Ethan your smile." Charlotte obliged, and Ethan felt that same crack in his chest widen a little more. As winter settled over the valley, they fell into new rhythms. Willa still helped Rosa where she could, though now with Charlotte strapped to her chest in a sling Rosa had sewn. Ethan found himself rearranging his work so he could be near the house more often, close enough to hear if Willa needed anything. One snowy evening in January, when Charlotte was 2 months old, Willa asked Ethan to sit with her while the baby slept. They had moved the rocking chair near the fireplace in the main room, and Willa had wrapped herself in a thick shawl against the cold. "I have been thinking about the future," she said without preamble. "Charlotte will not be an infant forever. Soon she will be walking and talking and getting into everything. I need to think about what kind of life I can provide for her." Ethan felt his stomach clench. "Are you thinking of leaving?" "I do not know what I am thinking. That is the problem." She stared into the fire, her profile outlined in gold. "I came here expecting to stay a few weeks at most. It has been nearly 5 months. You have been so generous, but I cannot live on your charity forever." "It is not charity, Willa. This is your home for as long as you want it to be." "But why?" She turned to face him, her expression intense. "Why do you want a widow and a baby in your house? You should be looking for a wife of your own, building your own family. Instead, you are stuck with us." "I am not stuck with you." Ethan moved to kneel in front of her chair, taking her hands in his. "Willa, I told you months ago that I have feelings for you. Those feelings have not changed. If anything, they have grown stronger. But I also told you I would not push, and I meant that. If you see me as only a friend, I can accept that. But do not leave because you think you are a burden. You and Charlotte, you make this house feel like a home in a way it never did before." Willa's eyes were bright with unshed tears. "I am so confused, Ethan. Part of me wants to stay here forever, to build a life with you, to let Charlotte grow up calling you father. But another part of me feels so guilty for even thinking such things. Thomas has been gone less than a year. What kind of woman does that make me?" "A woman who survived," Ethan said firmly. "A woman who kept going when most would have given up. Thomas is gone, and that is a tragedy, but you are still here. You are still living. That is not something to feel guilty about." "I think I am falling in love with you," she whispered, "and it terrifies me." Ethan felt his heart stutter in his chest. "Why does it terrify you?" "Because I already lost one person I loved. What if I lose you too? What if I let myself love you and something happens? I do not think I could survive that again." "You cannot live your life afraid of loss, Willa." "Yes, something might happen to me. A horse might throw me, or I might get sick, or any of 100 other things. But I could say the same about you, and it would not make me want you any less. Love is always a risk. The question is whether the risk is worth it." She pulled her hands free and cupped his face, her thumbs brushing over his cheekbones. "I am a coward. I need more time." "Then take all the time you need." He turned his head to kiss her palm. "I am not going anywhere." Spring came slowly to the valley, the snow melting in patches to reveal muddy ground and the first brave shoots of green. Charlotte was sitting up on her own now, a chubby, happy baby who loved to grab at everything within reach. She had developed a particular fondness for Ethan's hair, which she would yank with surprising strength whenever he held her. "She is going to make you bald before you are 30, Willa teased, watching Charlotte fist her hands in Ethan's dark hair and pull. "It will be worth it," Ethan replied, gently extracting himself from the baby's grip only to have her immediately grab on again. "Rosa, watching from the kitchen doorway, shook her head with a knowing smile. She had seen the way things were developing between Ethan and Willa, and she approved. In her opinion, they had both been dancing around their feelings long enough. One warm April afternoon, Rosa took matters into her own hands. "I am taking Charlotte to town with me," she announced. "There is a new fabric in at the general store, and I want the baby to see the other children at the church. You two have the afternoon to yourselves." Before either Ethan or Willa could protest, Rosa had Charlotte bundled into the wagon and was heading down the road, leaving them standing in the yard looking at each other. "I think we have been manipulated," Willa said, trying not to smile. "I think you are right." Ethan offered his arm. "Since we have been given the afternoon, would you like to take a walk? There is something I want to show you." They walked up into the hills behind the ranch, following a narrow path that wound between red rocks and scrubby juniper. Ethan led her to a small plateau that overlooked the entire valley. From here, you could see the ranch house and barns, the green strip of the river, and beyond that, the town of Beaver and the mountains rising in the distance. "This is where I came when I first bought the land," Ethan said. "I was 22 and terrified I had made a huge mistake. I sat right here and tried to imagine what my life would look like in 5 years, in 10 years. I saw myself building the ranch, maybe finding a wife eventually, having children. But it all felt distant and unreal, like a story about someone else's life." Willa sat down on a flat rock, smoothing her skirt over her knees. "And now when I imagine the future, it is not distant at all. I see Charlotte learning to ride. I see her starting school in town. I see us adding rooms onto the house as we need them. I see gray in your hair and lines around your eyes, and I see myself grateful for every day that brought us there." He sat beside her, close enough that their shoulders touched. "I see you, Willa. In every version of my future, I see you." She was quiet, staring out at the valley. When she finally spoke, her voice was thick with emotion. "Thomas and we had plans too. We were going to California, going to strike it rich, going to have 6 children and a big house. And then he got sick and all of it just vanished like smoke. I have been so afraid to make new plans, so afraid to want anything too much, because I know how quickly it can all be taken away." "I know." Ethan took her hand, lacing their fingers together. "I cannot promise you that nothing will ever go wrong. I cannot promise I will not get sick or hurt, or that life will not throw us more hardship. But I can promise that I will love you and Charlotte with everything I have. I can promise that I will do my best to make you happy every single day. And I can promise that sharing whatever burdens come our way will make them lighter for us both." Willa turned to look at him, really look at him. She saw the honesty in his eyes, the strength in the set of his shoulders, the gentleness in the way he held her hand. She thought about all the months he had cared for her, asking nothing in return. She thought about the way he looked at Charlotte, with such pure affection that it made her heart ache. She thought about her own heart, which had been slowly healing, slowly opening, slowly learning to hope again. "I love you," she said, and the words felt like stepping off a cliff into open air. "I love you, Ethan Burke, and I want to build a future with you. I want Charlotte to call you father. I want to wake up beside you when we are old and gray. I want all of it, and I am choosing to believe that we can have it." Ethan's smile was like sunrise, bright and warm and full of promise. "Is that a yes?" "Yes to what? You have not actually asked me anything." He laughed and got to his feet, then dropped to one knee in front of her. "Willa Peterson, will you marry me? Will you let me be your husband and Charlotte's father? Will you build a life with me here in this valley?" "Yes," she said, and then she was pulling him up and into her arms, kissing him with all the pent-up feeling of the past months. He kissed her back with equal fervor, his arms around her waist, lifting her slightly off the ground. When they finally broke apart, both breathless and grinning, Willa said, "Rosa is going to be insufferable about this. You know she planned this whole afternoon. She deserves to gloat." She was right. Ethan kissed her again, softer this time. "When should we get married? Do you want a big wedding or something small?" "Small," Willa said immediately. "Just us and the people we care about. I do not need anything fancy. Then we will make it simple and perfect, just like you." They were married 3 weeks later in the front room of the ranch house, with Dr. Hammond officiating and Rosa and Alice Morrison as witnesses. Charlotte, dressed in a white gown Rosa had sewn special for the occasion, babbled happily throughout the ceremony. When Ethan kissed his bride, the baby clapped her hands, making everyone laugh. The celebration was modest but joyful. Rosa had prepared a feast, and several neighbors from nearby ranches came to wish them well. As the sun set, Ethan and Willa stood on the porch watching their guests depart, Charlotte drowsy in Willa's arms. "Happy?" Ethan asked, his arm around Willa's waist. "Happier than I have been in a very long time," she replied, leaning into him. That night, after Charlotte was asleep in her cradle, Ethan and Willa came together as husband and wife. There was nervousness and tenderness, laughter at awkward moments and sighs of pleasure at others. Afterward, lying tangled in the sheets, Willa traced idle patterns on Ethan's chest. "Thank you for being patient with me," she said. "I know I made you wait a long time. You were worth waiting for." He kissed the top of her head. "You will always be worth it." Their first year of marriage was not without challenges. Charlotte went through a phase of waking every few hours at night, leaving both Ethan and Willa exhausted. There was a drought that summer that made water scarce and the cattle restless. Willa struggled with moments of guilt and grief, times when missing Thomas would hit her unexpectedly, and she would have to cry it out in Ethan's arms. But there were far more good moments than bad. Charlotte took her first steps on a warm September morning, wobbling from Rosa to Ethan with a look of intense concentration. Willa discovered she was pregnant again in October, and though she was nervous about having another child so soon, Ethan's joy was infectious. "Charlotte will have a brother or sister," he kept saying, wonder in his voice. "She will not grow up alone." The second baby, a boy they named Samuel, arrived in early May, just before Charlotte's second birthday. The birth was easier than Charlotte's had been, and Samuel was a calm baby who seemed content to sleep and eat and watch the world with solemn dark eyes. "He looks like you," Willa told Ethan, studying the baby's features. "Same serious expression." "He looks like his mother," Ethan countered. "Beautiful and perfect." Charlotte was fascinated by her baby brother, wanting to help with everything. She would bring Willa diapers and blankets, patting Samuel's head with gentle toddler hands and singing him the same lullabies Willa had sung to her. As the children grew, the ranch prospered. Ethan's careful management and Willa's head for numbers made them a formidable team. They expanded the cattle operation and started breeding horses, which Ethan had always wanted to do. Willa took over the ranch's finances and proved to have a talent for negotiation, getting better prices for their stock than Ethan had ever managed. On Charlotte's 5th birthday, Ethan took her up to the plateau, where he had proposed to Willa. Charlotte rode in front of him on his horse, chattering constantly about everything she saw. "Why did you bring me up here, Papa?" she asked when they dismounted. "Because this is a special place," Ethan explained. "This is where I asked your mother to marry me. I wanted you to see it, to understand that you are part of this family's story from the very beginning. You are my daughter, Charlotte, not just because I married your mother, but because I choose you every single day." Charlotte, who was bright and perceptive beyond her years, looked at him thoughtfully. "Mama told me about my first father. She said he died before I was born. That is right. His name was Thomas, and he loved you very much, even though he never got to meet you. Is it okay that I do not remember him? Is it okay that I call you Papa? Ethan knelt down so he was at her level. Your first father loved you, and I love you. You have room in your heart for both of us. And it is more than okay that you call me Papa. It is the greatest honor of my life. Charlotte threw her arms around his neck, hugging him tight. I love you, Papa. I love you too, sweetheart, always. When Samuel was 3 and Charlotte was 5, Willa became pregnant again. This time the pregnancy was harder and she was often sick and exhausted. Dr. Hammond prescribed rest, which Willa was terrible at following. She still tried to keep up with all her usual tasks until Ethan finally put his foot down. You are going to rest if I have to tie you to the bed, he said, only half joking. The ranch will not fall apart if you take a few months to focus on yourself and the baby. But there is so much to do, Willa protested weakly, and Rosa and I can handle it. Your job is to grow that baby and stay healthy. Let us take care of the rest. The baby, another girl they named Margaret, arrived in January during a snowstorm. She had Willa's honey-colored hair and Ethan's strong jaw, and she came into the world screaming her displeasure at the cold. Charlotte and Samuel were allowed to meet their sister the next morning, both wide-eyed with wonder at the tiny red-faced bundle. She is so small, Samuel whispered, touching one of Margaret's hands with a careful finger. You were that small once, Willa told him, and Charlotte before you. I will teach her everything, Charlotte declared with the confidence of a 5-year-old. How to ride horses and climb trees and read books. That sounds perfect, Ethan said, lifting Charlotte so she could see the baby better. She will be lucky to have you as a big sister. The years flowed past like water, each one bringing its own joys and sorrows. Rosa passed away peacefully in her sleep when Margaret was 2, and they buried her on the ranch she had loved, overlooking the valley. They hired a younger housekeeper named Sarah, but none of them ever quite stopped missing Rosa's firm hand and knowing smiles. Charlotte grew into a skilled rider and a voracious reader, often found in the barn with a book in one hand and a brush for the horses in the other. Samuel was quieter but equally determined, showing a talent for working with wood and building things. Margaret was wild and fearless, keeping Ethan and Willa constantly on their toes as she climbed too high and rode too fast and asked too many questions. When Charlotte was 15, a young man from town started paying attention to her. Willa noticed before Ethan did, and she watched her daughter's budding romance with mixed feelings of joy and anxiety. She is too young, Ethan said when Willa mentioned it. She is 15, same age I was when I first noticed boys, Willa replied. We do not have to marry her off tomorrow, but we should probably acknowledge that she is growing up. Ethan looked stricken. Can she not stay 10 forever? 10 was a good age. Willa laughed and kissed his cheek. No, she cannot stay 10. But she is smart and we have raised her well. She will be fine. As it turned out, Charlotte's young man moved away the following year, and she decided she would rather focus on learning to manage the ranch than on romance. There is time for all that later, she told her parents. Right now I want to learn everything you can teach me about running this place. Ethan could not have been more proud. Samuel, at 13, announced he wanted to become a carpenter. I like working with my hands, but I do not think ranching is for me, he said nervously. Is that okay? Of course it is okay, Willa assured him. You should do what makes you happy. We will support you no matter what. They apprenticed him to a master carpenter in Beaver, and he would come home on weekends full of stories about the projects he was working on. Watching him find his passion was a joy, even if it meant he would not take over the ranch. Margaret, at 11, was still convinced she could do anything her older siblings could do, only better. She could outride most of the ranch hands and had a way with horses that bordered on magical. She was also stubborn as a mule, a trait she had clearly inherited from both parents. One evening, when the children were all busy with their own activities, Ethan and Willa took a walk up to their plateau. It had become a tradition over the years, this walk to the place where their life together had truly begun. "Do you ever regret it?" Ethan asked, looking out over the valley as the sun painted everything gold. "Marrying me, staying here instead of going to California." "Never," Willa said without hesitation. "Not once, not even for a moment. You gave me a life I never could have imagined, Ethan. You gave me love and safety and a family. How could I ever regret that? I just want to make sure you are happy." "I am happy. I am so happy it scares me sometimes." She took his hand, her fingers still fitting perfectly with his after all these years. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day? That sharing burdens makes them lighter for us both." "I remember." "You were right. Every burden we have faced together, and that has made all the difference. The drought, Rosa's death, the hard years and the good years, all of it has been lighter because we carried it together." She turned to face him fully. "I love you more now than I did the day we married, and I loved you terribly even then." Ethan pulled her close, resting his chin on top of her head. "I love you too. You and those children of ours are the best thing that ever happened to me." They stood there as the sun set, wrapped in each other's arms, listening to the evening sounds of the valley. In the distance, they could hear Margaret calling for her horse and Samuel hammering away at some project in the barn. Charlotte's voice drifted up from the house, probably reading to Sarah from whatever book she had discovered this week. "We did well, did we not?" Willa said softly. "We did very well indeed." Years continued to pass, bringing the inevitable changes that come with time. Charlotte married at 22, choosing a neighboring rancher's son who loved her intelligence and spirit. She and her husband, James, built a house on the edge of the Burke property, and Charlotte continued to work closely with Ethan in managing the ranch. Samuel became a master carpenter in his own right, known throughout the territory for his beautiful furniture. He married a quiet schoolteacher named Anne, and they settled in Beaver with their 2 sons. Margaret, true to her wild nature, shocked everyone by becoming one of the first women in the territory to compete in horse races. She won more often than she lost, and at 19, she married a horse trainer from California who understood her need for speed and freedom. Ethan and Willa watched their children build their own lives with pride and, occasionally, terror at the chances they took. But they had raised them to be strong and independent, and they had to trust in that even when it was hard. On their 25th wedding anniversary, Charlotte organized a celebration at the ranch. All of their children and grandchildren gathered, filling the house with noise and laughter. Samuel had built a beautiful new table for the occasion, large enough to seat everyone. Margaret brought a champion mare as a gift for her parents to breed. Charlotte simply hugged them both and said, "Thank you for showing us what love looks like." That night, after everyone had gone home or to bed, Ethan and Willa sat on the porch as they had done countless times before. Willa's hair was streaked with silver now, and Ethan's face showed the lines of a life lived outdoors. But when they looked at each other, they still saw the people they had been that first day, when a broken woman had collapsed in the street and a rancher had stopped to help. 25 years, Willa mused. Sometimes it feels like yesterday, and sometimes it feels like we have always been together. "Any regrets?" Ethan asked, though he knew the answer. "Only that I wasted months being afraid when I could have been loving you." She leaned her head on his shoulder. "But I suppose we needed that time. I needed to heal, and you needed to be patient, and somehow it all worked out the way it was supposed to." "Everything works out the way it is supposed to," Ethan agreed. "As long as we are together." They sat in comfortable silence, watching the stars emerge in the darkening sky. Somewhere in the house, one of the grandchildren laughed, a bright sound that promised the future would be just as full of love as the past had been. The ranch continued to thrive under Charlotte and James's management, though Ethan and Willa still helped where they could. Ethan loved teaching his grandchildren to ride, and Willa spent hours reading to them just as she had once read to her own children. When Ethan was 65 and Willa 63, they took one final trip up to their plateau. It was harder now, their bodies not as strong as they once had been, but they managed. From their special spot, they could see the ranch spread out below, bigger and more prosperous than Ethan had ever dreamed in those early days. "I was so scared that day in Beaver," Willa said, her hand in Ethan's. "Scared and alone and certain I was going to die, and then you appeared, like an answer to a prayer I had been too afraid to say out loud." "I almost rode past," Ethan admitted. "I almost decided it was not my problem, that someone else would help. Thank God I did not." "Thank God," Willa echoed, "for all of it, the good and the bad, the easy years and the hard ones. Thank God for every moment that brought us here." They stayed until the sun began to set, painting the valley in shades of amber and rose. Then, supporting each other, they made their way back down to the ranch, to the home they had built together, to the family that surrounded them with love. Ethan Burke and Willa Peterson Burke lived to see their grandchildren grow and have children of their own. They celebrated 50 years of marriage surrounded by 4 generations of the family they had created together. And when Ethan passed peacefully in his sleep at 78, with Willa holding his hand, she mourned him deeply, but without regret. She lived another 5 years, long enough to see her great-great-grandchildren born, long enough to tell them the story of how she had collapsed in the street of Beaver, and a kind rancher had stopped to help. She told them about sharing burdens and building love and choosing to be brave even when you were terrified. When Willa finally closed her eyes for the last time, it was in the house Ethan had built, in the bed they had shared, surrounded by the family they had created. And if anyone had asked her in that final moment whether she had any regrets, whether she would change anything about the life she had lived, she would have smiled and said no. Because from that desperate moment in the dust to this peaceful ending, from burden to blessing, from stranger to soulmate, every step of the journey had been worth it. Every moment of fear had been balanced by moments of joy. Every tear had been answered with laughter. Every burden they had shared had indeed been lighter for having been carried together. And in the end, that was all that mattered. Not the struggles or the pain, but the love that had grown from them. Not the beginnings, however desperate, but the life they had built from those broken pieces. Not the individual burdens, but the beautiful truth that had sustained them through everything. That love shared is love multiplied, and burdens shared truly are lighter for them both. The Burke Ranch continued to thrive for generations, passed down through Charlotte's line. And in the family Bible that sat on the mantel, under Ethan and Willa's names, someone had written in careful script, "Here began a love that changed everything." It was the truest thing ever written,